Hey, Hinimasa, can I get a Yanagisawa shirt? I asked if I can get one of those shirts because I think they're cool. Then I asked if I could work in a factory, and they just laughed. Can I work in a factory? He thinks I'm joking.
You have to work hard.
They don't think Americans have what it takes, especially Americans that live in France. Ah, look at this. This one.
This one?
Yeah. I'm ready to work in a factory. Everyone knows they make a lot of amazing stuff in Japan. Some of the world's best cars, cameras, and consumer electronics are made here. But did you know that they also excel in making musical instruments, including my favorite one, the saxophone? I went to Tokyo to find out how the Japanese managed to make some of the finest saxophones and other musical instruments in the world. But when I got there, I learned some things I just did not expect. Luckily, I had a friend living in Tokyo who came along with me to help translate. This is Tomo, my friend from New York, Queens College. We went and bought saxophones together. Great arranger, great saxophone player, and a really great guy. Hidemasa!
Yeah.
How are you? That's Hidemasa, the Yanagisawa factory manager, picking us up. He's going to show us all around. For years, I have played on the Japanese-made Yanagisawa saxophones and have always wanted to visit their factory to see where the magic happens. So what does this say?
Yanagisawa sax and flute.
With the same logo. Today, we're going to see exactly what they do there that makes their saxophones so special.
Here's the first section.
In this section of the factory, skilled workers are preparing saxophone body tubes, bows, and bells to be assembled later on. These body tubes were cut from sheets of brass, bronze, and silver, and then bent into the cone shapes you see here. The bells and bows start out as two separate halves that get soldered together. Watch our friend here first tack this baritone saxophone body tube together at a few spots. Later on, these tubes will get completely soldered together neatly. One thing that is striking about the Yanagisawa process is that so much is done by hand without the aid of high-tech machines. These bells need to get properly shaped. The process begins with a Sharpie marker, followed by this interesting technique. Talk about low tech. This simple device allows the operator to be at the proper height for the job. This machine is precisely trimming off excess metal from these alto saxophone bows. Time for another one. I hope you're enjoying learning about how saxophones are made so far. If so, all I ask is that you click that like button, that you subscribe to the channel, and that you go visit BetterSax.com to learn about our fantastic saxophone courses to help you become a better saxophone player, as well as our instruments, mouthpieces, and accessories that we make especially for saxophonists, designed by saxophonists. It's your support that allows us to continue making great content like this on YouTube. Before we can move on to the next step, the body tubes, bells, and bows need to be smoothed out to remove the soldered joints and any tool markings. Today, this worker is doing baritone saxophone bells, while this one is doing altos. These are finished and ready for the next step. Bet you've never seen so many bari sax bells. Once the body tube is soldered together and properly prepared, it's time to make the tone holes. In order for them to be round, we start by cutting these oval shapes into the body tube. This soprano saxophone body is on a device that has precisely shaped metal tools inside it. One end of this device screws into the threaded tools, and the other is used to pull them out. The tone holes are drawn in sections using these fitted metal guides. The result is perfectly round tone holes, each at a precise diameter. For some of the smaller tone holes, the process is done with hand tools. The saxophone necks get heated up red hot to soften the metal in order to bend them into this odd shape. They get their final form from a high-pressure hydraulic blast of oil.
Thank you. You're finished.
Pretty crazy, right? This very old Yanagisawa saxophone on the wall serves as an example of what a finished product should look like for factory workers who may only be familiar with the individual parts they work with. The next step in our saxophone building process is attaching the posts and ribs to the body. These are the parts that hold the key mechanisms in place. That metal jig allows the worker to solder each part onto the body in exactly the right spot every time. It's a delicate operation requiring just the right amount of flux, solder, heat, and timing. This worker is soldering palm key posts onto a baritone saxophone body. Those burnt-looking keys are acting as placeholder guides. I found this amusing. These soft Hello Kitty bags are used to prevent the baritone saxophone bodies from hitting each other. So behind me, these Yanagisawa technicians are putting keys on the bodies, fitting the bells and the bows together. It's fascinating how fast they work. I'm also fascinated about how quiet it is. I'm whispering. This worker is precisely fitting keys to this particular alto saxophone. If you've ever owned a Yanagisawa, you may have noticed how perfectly their keys fit between the posts with no excess movement. So here we're putting together sets of keys for saxophones. Some of these drawers, you see, that's all G-sharp keys. This is all side B-flat keys. Each Yanagisawa saxophone gets its own set of keys assigned to it that, once fitted, stay with the instrument throughout the rest of the building process. This brass bow is being attached to this solid silver alto sax body in preparation for key fitting. You may have noticed that the engraving has already been done on these bells. I'll show you that process in a minute. This technician is aligning the bell to the body. You'll notice that the saxophone has not yet been buffed or lacquered. He needs to get everything fitting perfectly before those steps are done. In this section of the factory, they are making the key posts by hand. Most saxophone manufacturers are going to just order these posts pre-made somewhere else. Yanagisawa needs to make sure that everyone is up to their level of quality, so they do it in-house. So look, every one of these drawers has a different type of custom-made in-house key posts that then get sent down to the other room for the assembly. And there's like a million different things. There are vending machines everywhere in Tokyo. Like everywhere you look, there's vending machines. All right, so here we have to put on slippers. I'm not sure where we're going, but I'm getting my slippers on. Part of this feels like a factory. Part of it also feels like I'm in somebody's house. Yeah, watch your head.
Here it's the engraving section.
This is my favorite part. Okay, so I'm in the engraving room again. You gotta whisper, because this place is really quiet. First, the design is drawn on with this crayon. Today, they're working on sopranos. Then the engraving is done entirely by hand. This is the master engraver who did the custom engraving of my TW-033 tenor saxophone. He's in charge of all the elite solid silver models that Yanagisawa makes. This factory is spread out across a few different buildings in a residential neighborhood in Tokyo. We're now headed to the buffing section. After the engraving, all the bodies and keys need to be cleaned up, smoothed, and prepared for lacquering. It's a noisy and dirty job. Each of those trays of keys have been marked with the serial number of the saxophone body they have already been precisely fitted to. Next step is lacquering. We couldn't go in that room without the proper protection, of course, but you can see these bronze alto necks getting a clear coat of lacquer sprayed on. These sets of keys have been lacquered and are now getting wiped down and inspected for any blemishes. Now we are in the pre-assembly section. Before the saxophones get put together, the keys are prepped. This is like cutting the vegetables before you begin cooking. This worker is putting a carefully measured quantity of shellac into each pad cup and installing its pad. Remember, these keys have been dry fit to their matched saxophone body. This process is part of why Yanagisawas come so well set up from the factory and stay well set up for years with minimal maintenance. These workers are installing pre-cut corks on the keys. Yanagisawa uses a mixture of natural cork, synthetic cork, and felt because different keys require different amounts and densities of cushion. This worker is installing the octave key on a soprano saxophone neck. First, she puts some grease in both ends of the hinge tubing. Then she installs the hinge rod, wipes off the excess, and finally she uses a gauge to align the key perfectly. Now our saxophones are ready for the most important section of the factory, the final assembly. Saxophones have so many moving parts that if the mechanisms aren't properly set up to exacting standards, the instrument just won't play well and it won't stay in adjustment for very long. It's the work done in this room that really sets Yanagisawa apart from other brands. Each station is responsible for one task and each saxophone is assembled in the same order. This saxophone has the right-hand keys installed. This one has the right and left-hand keys installed. This one has those plus the side keys. This one has the palm keys as well. This one has the octave key on it. This one has had the bell attached, and this one has the low E flat and C keys installed.
The C and E flat keys.
is done. Now it's time for the final check. These finished saxophones get carried 2 at a time down the street to the warehouse for packing. At this point in our visit, I realized there was something missing. This whole time we're in this incredibly quiet factory and I haven't once heard the sound of a saxophone playing. So I asked, where is the saxophone testing section? And Hidemasa answered me somewhat embarrassed. We don't play test saxophones. Of course, my head explodes. It's a big mess. I have to put everything back together. Yanagisawa produces what are widely considered the most consistent and well set up saxophones anywhere in the world. They are so confident in their process and system that they don't need to test them before sending them out to the customers. That right there says everything you need to know about Yanagisawa as a company and culture. I realize that this video may come across as some kind of advertisement for Yanagisawa, but it's not. I paid for the whole trip to Japan myself. Yanagisawa just picked me up at the hotel and they bought me lunch, which was nice. Arigatou gozaimasu. And if you love learning about how other saxophone stuff is made, you're really going to enjoy this video. Watch it next.